Good day. These are the sample questions for the second topic under aquaculture. Principles of aquaculture 1. Which is not true in a monoculture system? A. Knowledge of different feeding habits. B. One species in pond unit. C. Easier to perform and manage. D. All of the above. The answer is A. Knowledge of different feeding habits. Knowledge of different feeding habits is not required in a monoculture system because in a monoculture system is rearing of single species of fish in one culture chamber. That's why it is easier to perform and manage. 2. Regularly check on feeding properly done on several occasions, except A. Before feeding. B. During feeding. C. At the end of the production cycle. D. None of the above. The answer is D. None of the above. Regularly check on feeding properly done on several occasions are A. Before feeding. Check if there is any feed left over from the previous meal. B. During feeding. Observe the fish carefully to see how actively they eat. A good appetite is a sign of good health and good water quality. C. Every 15 to 30 days, check on the new fish biomass present in the pond and adjust the daily feeding ration accordingly. D. Check on feed utilization during the last 15 to 30-day period by calculating the food conversion ratio for this period. E. At the end of the production cycle, check on feed utilization by calculating the food conversion ratio for this particular cycle. 3. Use of supplementary feed. A. Natural food becomes insufficient. B. Ensure good water quality. C. To raise more fish in your pond. D. Both A and B. The answer is D. Both A and B. Used a supplementary feed when natural food become insufficient to feed your fish well and ensure good growth, and when you wish to raise more fish in your pond to produce a higher crop and still have good growth. For amount of inorganic nutrients found in an ecosystem. It represents the part of non-living matter. A. A standing crop. B. Standing state. C. Biomass. D. Population. The answer is B. Standing state. Standing state is the amount of inorganic nutrients found in an ecosystem. It represents the part of non-living matter. 5. Maximum carrying capacity per unit area can be obtained in A. Ponds. B. Tanks. C. Raceways. D. Cages. The answer is C. Raceways. Maximum carrying capacity per unit area can be obtained in flow-through raceway systems. Per unit of space, raceway production is much higher. Raceways also offer a much greater ability to observe the fish. This can make feeding more efficient, and disease problems are easier to detect and at earlier stages. 6. Which statement is correct? A. The shorter the food chain from plants to fish, the lower the production obtained. B. The longer the food chain from plants to fish, the lower the production obtained. C. The shorter the food chain from plants to fish, the lower the production obtained. D. The longer the food chain from plants to fish, the higher the production obtained. The answer is B. The longer the food chain from plants to fish, the lower the production obtained. According to Principle 1, the longer the food chain from plants to fish, the lower the production obtained. Because the shorter food chain, it means more energy available to the final consumer. Then the further along the food chain you go, the less food, and hence energy, remains available. 7. How many percent is the transfer of energy from one trophic level to the next? A. 1%, B. 5%, C. 10%, D. 15%. The answer is C. 10%. According to the 10% of law, only about 10% of the energy available at one trophic level is passed along to the next. 8. Which statement is correct? A. The smaller the fish, the higher its metabolic rate. B. The smaller the fish, the lower its metabolic rate. C. The bigger the fish, the higher its metabolic rate. D. None of the above. The answer is A. The smaller the fish, the higher its metabolic rate. According to the Principle 10, the smaller the fish, the higher its metabolic rate, so that more food per unit of body weight is needed for a small fish to reach and maintain maximum growth capacity than larger fish. 9. Which is true in polyculture system? A. Knowledge of different feeding habits. B. One species in pond unit. C. Easier to perform and manage. D. All of the above. The answer is A. Knowledge of different feeding habits. Knowledge of different feeding habits is a must in a polyculture system since it reared more than one species. 10. What is FCR? A. Food conversion ratio. B. Feed conversion ratio. C. A and B. D. None of the above. The answer is B. Feed conversion ratio. FCR stands for feed conversion ratio. The FCR is simply the amount of feed it takes to grow a kilogram of fish. 11. Overcrowding is lessened by A. Cultivation of multiple species. B. Stocking less fish. C. Use of fish with different sizes. D. Use of carnivorous species. The answer is D. Use of carnivorous species. According to Aquaculture Principle 14, use of carnivorous species can lessen the overcrowding in culture units. 12. The energy needed in photosynthesis. A. Carbon dioxide. B. Aquatic environment. C. Sunlight. D. Oxygen. The answer is C. Sunlight. Sunlight allows plants such as aquatic plants and algae to undergo photosynthesis to convert carbon dioxide and water into organic compounds like carbohydrates. 13. What do you call the number of steps of the organisms is away from the primary production? A. Food chain. B. Food web. C. Trophic level. D. Pyramid. The answer is C. Trophic level. Trophic level is the step in a nutritive series, or food chain, of an ecosystem. The organisms of a chain are classified into these levels on the basis of their feeding behavior. The first and lowest level contains the producers, green plants. 14. This is done when there is an insufficient supply of natural food in a pond. A. Supplemental feeding. B. Complete feeding. C. Feeding rate. D. Both A and C. The answer is A. Supplemental feeding. Supplemental feeding is done when there is an insufficient supply of natural food in a pond. Culture species are supplied with supplementary or formulated feeds that contains the nutrient requirement that the fish needs. 15. What is the provision of nutritionally complete high-quality diet? A. Supplemental feeding. B. Complete feeding. C. Feeding rate. D. Both A and B. The answer is B. Complete feeding. Complete feeding contains all the nutrients of level that required by the animal. 16. What BOD stands for? A. Biological oxygen demand. B. Biochemistry oxygen demand. C. Biometric oxygen demand. D. Bioscience oxygen demand. The answer is a biological oxygen demand. BOD stands for biological oxygen demand, which the oxygen consumption through animal and plant respiration. It also means by the decomposition of organic matter and organic chemical reaction. 17. It allows the introduction of quantities of feed excess of these possible in unaerated pond. What it is? A. Biofilter. B. Biochemical oxygen demand. C. Aeration. D. Biomass. The answer is C. Aeration. Aeration means increasing the oxygen content of all or part of the pond water to limits which ensure the oxygen supply to the fish without limiting the production at a given management level. 18. What is the type of fertilizer that containing NPK? A. Inorganic fertilizer. B. Organic fertilizer. C. Fertilizer. D. All of the above. The answer is a inorganic fertilizer. Inorganic fertilizer contains N, P, K, or nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in a varying proportion that are readily taken up by primary producers. It's also assured the immediate nutrient availability for the primary producer. 19. This equipment is used for knowing the average depth of pond. A. Secchi disc. B. Net. C. Both A and B. D. None of the above. The answer is A. Secchi disc. Secchi disc has a diameter of 20 to 30 centimeters. It is made of plywood, metal, or plastic. It is used for knowing the average depth of pond at which the disc disappears and reappears in the Secchi disc visibility. 20. What are the signs of poor health in fish? A. Nutritional deficiency. B. Poor water quality. C. Overcrowding and environmental factors. D. All of the above. The answer is D. All of the above. According to Aquaculture Principle 20, fish that are in poor health will not grow as rapidly compared to fish that are in excellent health.